Emily and Ryan Matthews stood before the cameras with tears streaming down their faces, pleading for the safe return of their missing baby. To the world, they looked like heartbroken parents trapped in a nightmare. But behind those tears lay a chilling secret. As the search intensified, investigators began to uncover a web of lies that would expose the couple as suspects in one of the most disturbing crimes their quiet town had ever seen. The story began in a neighborhood that was usually described as quiet and safe, the kind of place where children played on front lawns and everyone felt secure leaving their doors unlocked. It was in this seemingly ordinary setting that something unthinkable happened. A young couple reported their 6-month-old baby missing from the crib during the night. According to them, they had gone to bed as usual, checked on the baby before turning off the lights, and awoke to find the nursery empty. The discovery, they said, was sudden and horrifying, with only a small blanket on the floor and a window slightly open as though someone had slipped inside. What might have been viewed as a random act of intrusion quickly escalated into a full-scale police investigation. Officers were called immediately, and within minutes, squad cars lined the street and crime scene tape went up around the small, modest home. Inside, police began carefully combing through each room. They expected to see the chaos of a break-in, overturned drawers, or scattered belongings, but the opposite greeted them. The house was immaculately clean, too pristine for a family who had just suffered a shocking disappearance. The crib itself held no signs of struggle, no claw marks or scratches, no signs of resistance. The blanket that lay on the carpet appeared neatly folded at one corner, almost as if placed rather than dropped. The window latch showed no sign of tampering, and the screen, though removed, bore no fingerprints or dirt smudges that might indicate someone had forced it open. Detectives immediately began questioning the story that had been presented to them, and suspicion quietly replaced sympathy. Outside, reporters quickly arrived, and neighbors clustered at the edges of the yellow tape, whispering among themselves. Some described the parents as quiet, polite people who mostly kept to themselves. Others mentioned how they had rarely seen the baby outside, claiming the child seemed hidden away except for brief appearances in a stroller on rare afternoons. The suddenness of the event rattled everyone, but what unsettled the most was the eerie silence that had surrounded the supposed abduction. None of the neighbors reported hearing anything unusual during the night. No glass breaking, no cries, not even the rustling of footsteps in the yard. The night had been calm, and yet, according to the parents, someone had entered their home, taken their child, and left without a trace. By morning, the missing baby's photograph was circulating on flyers, and volunteers walked the neighborhood calling the child's name. Police K-9 units were brought in to trace a scent from the window, but the dogs circled aimlessly, confused, unable to follow any trail that led away from the house. Investigators began to think that perhaps there was no trail to follow. As one officer quietly remarked to another, the evidence suggested the baby had never left the home at all. The idea was chilling, one that no one wanted to consider in those first hours, but it lingered in the air unspoken. The parents, sobbing before cameras, begged for the return of their child, their faces wet with tears. Yet behind them loomed the silent house that seemed to be hiding secrets of its own. Detectives spent the following days reconstructing every moment that led up to the baby's disappearance, determined to uncover what had gone wrong. They collected surveillance footage from nearby stores, banks, and gas stations, tracing the parents' movements with meticulous detail. On one recording, the couple appeared cheerful and relaxed as they shopped for baby supplies: formula, wipes, diapers, even a small stuffed toy. To the outside world, it painted a picture of two loving parents caring for their child with devotion. Investigators initially thought this footage would support the parents' claims of being victims, but the more they examined, the more troubling details emerged. Another receipt surfaced from a local hardware store, time-stamped just a day before the disappearance, showing purchases of bleach, gloves, and heavy-duty trash bags. Detectives found it hard to ignore the timing of such items. raising the possibility that what had been framed as a kidnapping was something far darker. Back at the house, forensic teams worked day and night. They applied luminol, a chemical that glows when it comes into contact with blood, to the nursery walls, the crib, and the surrounding floorboards. The results were puzzling. Faint traces lit up in spots that should never have been there if the baby had simply vanished. Although the samples were too small to confirm immediately, the discoveries unsettled even the most experienced officers. As this evidence was gathered, the parents remained in the public eye, appearing on local news stations with tearful pleas for their child's safe return. They clutched photographs of the infant, their voices breaking as they begged anyone with information to come forward. But behind closed doors, investigators were noting their inconsistencies. In separate interviews, the father claimed he had gone to check on the baby around midnight and found everything normal, while the mother insisted it had been closer to 2 in the morning when she peeked in. Small details like these might have been dismissed in a typical case, but when every minute mattered, they took on greater weight. Detectives also noticed that the couple's descriptions of the open window did not align. One claimed the curtain had been pulled aside, the other said it was left hanging naturally. These discrepancies grew larger as questions became more precise, painting a picture not of shock-stricken parents, but of two people struggling to keep their story straight. Neighbors who had at first rallied around the couple now whispered doubts. Several admitted to detectives that they had never heard the baby cry at night, something unusual for a child of that age. Others recalled how the family often kept to themselves, rarely allowing visitors inside. Even relatives who came forward during the search expressed unease, describing strained interactions that hinted at tension within the household. As word spread, public opinion began to shift. The couple's crying faces on the news no longer stirred sympathy for everyone. For some, they stirred suspicion. Meanwhile, the search for the baby expanded beyond the neighborhood. Officers scoured nearby fields, rivers, and wooded areas, while volunteers combed ditches and back roads. Yet every effort came back empty. It was as though the infant had vanished into thin air. The absence of footprints outside the window, the absence of scent for the dogs, and the absence of any credible sightings left investigators frustrated. They began to accept the possibility that the child had never left the house alive. That suspicion, though unspoken publicly, quietly guided the direction of the case. Evidence was mounting, and the image of grieving parents was beginning to unravel. The search took a dramatic turn when officers extended their efforts beyond the immediate area, pushing deeper into the wooded trails that bordered the town. Dozens of volunteers had been combing fields and ditches for days, but it was a small detail that redirected attention. A local farmer reported seeing a scrap of fabric tangled in the brush near his property. Investigators retrieved it and quickly realized it was not ordinary cloth. It was part of a tiny onesie, mud-stained and torn, with a familiar cartoon pattern. Testing confirmed what many feared. The fabric belonged to the missing infant. The news spread like wildfire, and the sense of dread that had been building finally erupted into outrage. The discovery changed the case entirely. What had been treated as a hopeful search for a missing child transformed into a likely homicide investigation. The parents, who had been the faces of the campaign to bring the baby home, stood under an even harsher spotlight. Television cameras captured their weeping expressions as they walked into the courthouse for an emergency hearing. Yet those present noted something strange in their manner. While their eyes overflowed with tears, their movements seemed stiff, almost controlled. They did not comfort each other, did not embrace the way grieving parents might. Instead, they stood apart, shoulders rigid, as though trying to maintain composure under a performance. The crowd that had once prayed for their family now whispered accusations, anger replacing empathy. Detectives compiled the evidence they had so far and built their case step by step. The torn clothing showed signs of deliberate damage rather than natural wear. The soil around where it was found appeared disturbed, suggesting someone had tried to bury something before thinking better of it. Dogs brought to the site reacted with intensity, circling the spot and pawing at the dirt. For investigators, it confirmed the theory that the baby had been there, at least temporarily. The clean house, the lack of a trail, and the fabric in the woods painted a chilling picture of a staged disappearance designed to mislead. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors began laying the groundwork for formal charges. They introduced early forensic reports showing faint traces of infant blood detected in multiple areas of the family's home, though none were visible to the naked eye. They described the odd purchases made by the couple days before, the bleach, the gloves, the trash bags, items that looked more sinister with each passing day. The parents sat together at the defense table, crying into tissues, but their faces remained oddly cold, their bodies tense. Observers in the gallery began to question whether the tears were for their child or for themselves. Outside, the community wrestled with betrayal. Neighbors who had walked side by side in search efforts now spoke with bitterness about wasted time, about being manipulated into helping people who might have been hiding the truth all along. Flyers that once carried a hopeful message were now seen as symbols of deception. Volunteers admitted they felt used, their goodwill twisted into a mask for something unspeakable. For the detectives, the case was far from over. The torn fabric and disturbed soil raised urgent questions. Where was the baby now, and why had the parents allowed the world to believe in a lie? With every new discovery, the circle of suspicion tightened, and the couple's carefully constructed image of devastated parents continued to fracture in full public view. Investigators had already built a case of suspicion, but the turning point came when digital forensics experts examined the parents' devices. Hidden within the browser histories were late-night searches that unsettled even seasoned detectives. Phrases like, "how to suffocate without leaving marks," "how long until a body smells," and "missing infant cases unsolved," glared back from the screens. The searches stretched over weeks, suggesting not a moment of panic, but a slow, deliberate curiosity that pointed toward premeditation. Alongside these searches were message exchanges between the parents. They spoke of exhaustion, of financial stress, of feeling trapped in responsibilities they had not expected. Some lines carried an undertone of resentment, hinting that the baby had become less a source of joy and more a burden they were desperate to escape. As these details emerged, prosecutors began to frame a narrative of intent. They argued that the couple, overwhelmed by pressure and debt, had plotted a way out of their situation and in doing so, sacrificed the most innocent life possible. The defense countered by claiming the searches were taken out of context, insisting they were the product of anxious, sleepless nights and not evidence of a crime. But then came another revelation that shifted the entire trial's atmosphere. Forensic scientists presented findings from the trunk of the family car. Despite the vehicle having been scrubbed clean, chemical testing revealed traces of blood that matched the missing infant's DNA. It was a discovery so damning that it silenced the courtroom as it was read aloud. The parents' tears flowed freely as this evidence was shown, tissues clutched in their hands, but observers noticed something strange. Their grief never spilled over into their movements. They sat stiff, shoulders tense, eyes darting at one another but rarely holding contact. Jurors studied them closely, noting how their crying faces seemed oddly disconnected from the body language of true devastation. Prosecutors seized on this, portraying the couple as manipulative actors using emotion as a shield. The phrase "crocodile tears" began circulating in the press, eroding what little sympathy remained for them. Meanwhile, investigators traced financial records that further painted a troubling picture. Insurance policies had recently been taken out on the infant, small but suspiciously timed given the disappearance. Bank statements showed overdue bills, maxed-out credit cards, and a household teetering on collapse. Prosecutors suggested the couple viewed the child's death as a way to alleviate their spiraling situation, a theory that horrified the public. Every day in court felt heavier than the last. Reporters described the chilling contrast between the couple's weeping faces and the damning evidence piling up against them. The digital searches, the blood in the car, the cleaning supplies, and the fabric found in the woods all seemed to lock together like pieces of a puzzle. The defense fought to pull them apart, to cast doubt on each item, but the image forming was too powerful to ignore. What once looked like a tragedy at the hands of an unknown intruder was being reframed as a cold-blooded crime committed by those meant to love the child most. The weight of that reality pressed down on everyone in the courtroom, leaving an air of dread that even the most seasoned officers found hard to shake. The final and most heartbreaking twist came weeks later, when a hiker wandering through a remote wooded area stumbled upon disturbed soil near a stream. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a patch of ground softened by rain, but something about the uneven mound drew his attention. He alerted authorities, and within hours the site was surrounded by investigators. What they uncovered was devastating. Buried just beneath the surface lay the infant's tiny body, wrapped tightly in a blanket that had once been seen in the family's home. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of both the police and the community, and with it, any hope of finding the baby alive was destroyed. The location was carefully examined, and evidence revealed the grave had been dug in haste. Roots and stones had been left uncut, soil clumped unevenly, and animal tracks around the disturbed patch suggested the grave had already begun to give up its secret. The revelation shattered the image the parents had tried so hard to maintain. Their public pleas, their tears for the cameras, and their courtroom displays of grief now appeared hollow in the face of undeniable proof. Prosecutors wasted no time in presenting the body's discovery during the trial, describing in detail how the shallow grave spoke not of love or despair, but of concealment and cowardice. The jury sat stone-faced as photos of the site were displayed, their expressions hardening with each piece of evidence. For the first time, there was no doubt about what had happened. The baby had been deliberately silenced and hidden away by those who were supposed to protect it. In court, the parents continued to cry, but their weeping carried no weight anymore. Observers noted how their faces contorted in sorrow, yet their bodies remained strangely composed. The tears seemed endless, but the emotions behind them felt absent, a hollow performance against the mountain of truth now crushing them. The prosecution reminded jurors of the internet searches, the blood traces, the bleach and gloves, the staged window, and now, the final piece, the lifeless child recovered from the earth. Each element linked seamlessly, building a story that was no longer possible to dismiss. The defense clung to the argument of tragedy gone wrong, suggesting perhaps the baby had died accidentally and panic had led to poor decisions. But such words rang empty in the ears of those who had watched the case unfold. The community, once united in search efforts, now gathered outside the courthouse in protest, holding signs that demanded justice. People who had handed out flyers and searched fields now felt betrayed, their compassion exploited by parents who had used them as tools to cover their crime. When the jury finally delivered its verdict, it took little time. Guilty of murder, guilty of tampering with evidence, guilty of betrayal so profound that even seasoned court officials admitted it was among the most chilling cases they had seen. The sentencing brought no sense of relief, only a somber acknowledgement that justice could never restore what had been lost. Outside, candles were lit in memory of the baby, a symbol of innocence stolen too soon. The image of the parents crying in court would remain etched in memory, not as grieving victims, but as cold figures who had shed tears for themselves while burying the truth along with their child.